The rich rancher tried to take the obese girl as payment for debt, until the mountain man showed up. The Wyoming territory stretched endlessly beneath a sky so wide it seemed to swallow the earth whole. It was November of 1821, and the wind carried the bite of winter across the red dust plains, whistling through the scattered cottonwoods and rattling the wooden bones of the tiny settlement known as Broken Creek. This was a place where survival meant bowing to those with land, cattle, and guns, and no man held more of all three than Clayton Reeves. Sarah Ann Whitmore knew this truth better than most. At 23, she had lived her entire life in the shadow of Reeves's sprawling ranch, watching the seasons turn while her own world grew smaller. She was a large woman, heavy in frame and soft in feature, with dark hair she kept tied back and hands roughened by labor. The townspeople whispered about her size when they thought she couldn't hear, their words floating on the wind like thistledown, sharp and invasive. But Sarah had learned long ago to build walls around her heart, to focus on what mattered, keeping her father alive. Jacob Whitmore had once been a trapper, strong-backed and fearless, but years of harsh winters and failed harvests had worn him down to a shell. The consumption had settled into his lungs 3 years prior, turning his cough wet and his skin the color of old parchment. Their cabin, little more than 4 walls and a leaking roof, sat at the edge of Reeves's property, a constant reminder of their dependence on the rancher's mercy. That mercy, Sarah had discovered, came with a price that grew steeper with each passing month. She worked from sunrise to sunset in Reeves's kitchens and laundry, scrubbing clothes until her fingers bled and hauling water until her back screamed in protest. The wages were meager, barely enough to buy flour and salt, let alone the medicine her father needed. So they had borrowed. First a little, then more, until the debt became a living thing that coiled around their throats like a noose. On this particular November morning, Sarah stood in the ranch house kitchen, her hands submerged in a tub of scalding water, when she heard the boots on the wooden floor behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Clayton Reeves moved through his domain like a king, his presence announced by the jingle of spurs and the scent of expensive tobacco. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "A word, if you please." Sarah dried her hands on her apron and turned slowly. Reeves was a tall man in his early 40s, handsome in a cold sort of way, with steel-gray hair and eyes the color of a winter sky. He dressed in fine clothes imported from the East, silk vests and polished boots, and carried himself with the certainty of a man who had never been told no. "Yes, Mr. Reeves?" He smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "I've been reviewing my accounts. Your father's debt has grown quite substantial, $300 to be exact, plus interest, of course." Sarah's stomach dropped. $300 might as well have been 3,000. She would never earn that much in 5 years, let alone have it to spare. "Sir, I'm working as hard as I can." "Oh, I know you are, darling." He stepped closer, and Sarah caught the scent of whiskey beneath the tobacco. "You're a hard worker. Strong back, never complains. Those are valuable qualities." His gaze traveled down her body in a way that made her skin crawl. "Very valuable indeed." "Mr. Reeves, please, just give us more time." "Time?" He laughed, a sound without humor. "Time is money, Miss Whitmore, and I've given your family plenty of both. No, I think it's time we discussed alternative arrangements." Before Sarah could respond, Reeves turned and walked toward the front of the house. "Come along. We're going to have a little town meeting." Her heart hammering, Sarah followed him outside. The November sun hung low and cold in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty main street of Broken Creek. Reeves's ranch hands were already gathering, along with several townspeople who had been drawn by the commotion. Sarah spotted her father among them, leaning heavily on his walking stick, his face pale with worry. "Papa," she whispered, moving toward him, but Reeves caught her arm. "Not yet, my dear. First, let's make sure everyone understands the situation." He raised his voice, addressing the crowd. "Friends and neighbors, as you know, I am a generous man. I've extended credit to many of you, helped you through hard times, given you opportunities you wouldn't have had otherwise." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "But generosity has its limits. Jacob Whitmore here owes me $300 a debt he has no means of repaying. Normally, I would simply take his property, such as it is." He gestured dismissively toward the shabby cabin. "But that hovel isn't worth $50, let alone $300. Jacob stepped forward, his voice cracking. "Please, Mr. Reeves, I'll work it off. I'll do whatever you need." "You?" Reeves laughed cruelly. "You can barely stand upright, old man. No, I have a better solution." He pulled Sarah forward, his grip tight on her wrist. "Your daughter here has been working for me for months. She's strong, capable, and—" his smile turned predatory. "She has other qualities that might prove valuable." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Sarah's face burned with humiliation as she understood what Reeves was proposing. "If the debt cannot be paid in gold," Reeves continued, "then it shall be paid in kind. Miss Whitmore will come to live at my ranch permanently. She'll work in my household, and I will personally oversee her education. Consider it an investment in her future." "No!" Jacob's voice cracked with desperation. He fell to his knees in the dust. "Please, sir, she's all I have. Take me instead. Take my life, but don't take my daughter." Reeves barely glanced at him. "Your life isn't worth a plugged nickel, Whitmore." He turned back to Sarah, reaching up to grip her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "I'll teach you how to properly serve a real man. You might even learn to enjoy it." The crowd remained silent. Sarah could see pity in some faces, disgust in others, but no one spoke up. No one dared challenge Clayton Reeves. Her eyes stung with tears she refused to shed. She thought of her father, of the years he had protected her, loved her, despite everything. She thought of the cruelty of a world where a man's debt could be paid with his daughter's freedom. She opened her mouth to speak, to agree, to surrender, to do whatever it took to spare her father more pain, when a voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "Take your hand off her, Reeves." The voice came from the direction of the stables, low and rough as gravel, carrying the weight of absolute authority. Every head turned. The man who emerged from the shadows was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in buckskins that had seen hard use. His hair was dark and long, tied back with a leather cord, and his face was weathered by sun and wind into hard planes and angles. He wore a hunting knife on his belt and carried a rifle with the easy familiarity of someone who had been born with a weapon in his hands. But it was his eyes that commanded attention, pale blue, cold as mountain ice, and completely without fear. Sarah recognized him immediately. Everyone in Broken Creek knew Elias Boone, though few had seen him in the past 2 years. He was a legend, a mountain man who had once served as an Army scout during the frontier conflicts. After the war, he had retreated into the high country, living alone, appearing in town only occasionally to trade furs and supplies. There were stories about him that he had killed a grizzly bear with nothing but a knife, that he could track a man across solid rock, that he had once walked 50 miles through a blizzard to warn a settlement of an impending attack. Clayton Reeves's face darkened. "Boone, I should have known you'd stick your nose where it doesn't belong. This is none of your concern." Elias stepped fully into the street, his boots crunching on the frozen ground. "I'm making it my concern." "Are you?" Reeves released Sarah's chin but didn't step back. "You have some nerve showing your face here. You owe me money too, if you recall. 3 jobs you did for me clearing out that wolf pack, tracking down my stolen cattle, dealing with those bandits up north. I never did get around to paying you for those. Figure that makes us about even in the debt department." "You're right." Elias reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. He walked forward slowly, his gaze never leaving Reeves, and dropped the pouch onto the wooden bench outside the general store. It landed with a heavy thunk, coins spilling out gold coins, gleaming in the pale sunlight. "That's for the Whitmore debt. $400. Should cover the principal and whatever interest you've been calculating in that thieving brain of yours." The crowd gasped. $400 in gold was a fortune in these parts. Elias wasn't finished. He reached into his coat again and produced another, smaller pouch. "And this is for my work, the jobs you never paid for. Another $200. We're square now, Reeves. You don't own me, and you sure as hell don't own her." Clayton Reeves stared at the gold, his jaw working. Sarah could see the calculation in his eyes. The money was substantial, more than enough to settle both debts with profit to spare. But it wasn't about money anymore. It was about power, about not being challenged in front of his own people. "Gold is gold," Reeves said slowly. "But maybe I don't want gold. Maybe I want exactly what I asked for." Elias took another step forward. "Then you've got a problem." "Do I?" Reeves's hand moved toward the pistol at his hip. "I've got 20 men on this ranch, Boone. You think you can take us all?" "I think you value your teeth too much to find out." For a moment, the street was utterly silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Sarah watched, frozen, as the 2 men faced each other. She could see Reeves's men shifting nervously, hands moving toward weapons, but not quite drawing them. They knew Elias Boone's reputation. They had heard the stories. "You're bluffing," Reeves said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "Try me." What happened next occurred so fast that Sarah barely registered it. Reeves's hand completed its movement toward his gun, his fingers just brushing the grip. When Elias moved, he crossed the space between them in 2 strides, his fist connecting with Reeves's jaw with a sound like an axe hitting wood. The rancher went down hard, sprawling in the dust, his hat flying off. Blood streamed from his mouth, where his teeth had cut his lip. Reeves's men surged forward, but Elias had already drawn his knife, the blade catching the sunlight. "First man who draws gets opened up," he said calmly. "Your choice." The ranch hands froze. They were tough men, used to rough work and rougher fights. But there was something in Elias Boone's eyes that spoke of death delivered with cold efficiency. This wasn't a barroom brawler or a drunk picking a fight. This was a man who had killed when necessary and wouldn't lose sleep over it. "Enough!" The voice came from Silas Harper, the town's aging marshal. He pushed through the crowd, his hand on his own pistol, but not drawing it. "That's enough from all of you? Boone, you've made your point." Elias didn't lower his knife. "Have I, Marshal? Or do we need to have a longer conversation about men who try to buy women like livestock?" Harper's weathered face flushed, but he stood his ground. "The debt's been paid. Mr. Reeves, you've got your money, and then some. The matter's settled." Reeves climbed slowly to his feet, wiping blood from his mouth. His eyes blazed with fury, but he was smart enough to recognize when he'd lost. Not the fight he could still rally his men and overwhelm Boone through sheer numbers, but the moment. The town had seen him knocked down and humiliated. They had seen him back down. Word would spread, and with it, his authority would crack. "Fine," he spat, blood flecking his lips. "Take your money. Take the girl and her worthless father, but you're not welcome on my land anymore, Boone, any of you." His gaze swept across the crowd. "Anyone who does business with the Whitmores or Elias Boone will answer to me." He turned and stalked back toward his ranch house, his men trailing behind him like whipped dogs. The crowd began to disperse, conversations buzzing with the drama they had just witnessed. Sarah stood motionless, her mind struggling to process what had happened. Her father had collapsed to his knees, weeping with relief. But Sarah's eyes were fixed on Elias Boone, this stranger who had just paid a fortune to free her from a nightmare she had resigned herself to living. Elias resheathed his knife and picked up the pouches of gold, handing them to Marshal Harper. "Make sure Reeves gets his due. I want a receipt showing both debts paid in full." "I'll see to it," Harper said quietly. "That was a fool thing to do, Boone. Reeves won't forget this." "I'm counting on it." Harper shook his head and walked away. Elias finally turned to Sarah and her father. Jacob was trying to stand, his legs shaking from emotion and exhaustion. Elias moved to help him, supporting the old man's weight with easy strength. "Thank you," Jacob wheezed. "God bless you, son, thank you." "Save your breath, sir. Let's get you home." Sarah found her voice at last. "Why?" The word came out as barely more than a whisper. "Why would you do this?" Elias looked at her for a long moment, his pale eyes searching her face. "Because I could," he said simply, "and because nobody else would." He helped Jacob start walking toward their cabin, and after a moment of stunned hesitation, Sarah followed. The cabin looked even more pathetic than usual in the afternoon light. The roof sagged in the middle, the windows were covered with oiled paper instead of glass, and the door hung crooked on its leather hinges. Inside, it was cramped and drafty, with a single room divided by a hanging blanket. Jacob's cot sat near the fireplace, surrounded by bottles of medicine Sarah could no longer afford. Elias helped Jacob to his bed, then stood awkwardly in the center of the small space, looking distinctly out of place. He was a man built for open skies and mountain ranges, not cramped cabins with low ceilings. Sarah busied herself building up the fire, needing something to do with her hands. Her mind was still reeling. "I don't understand," she said finally. "You paid $400 for us. $600 total. That's more money than I'll see in my entire life." "It's just gold," Elias said. "I've been trapping and hunting for 15 years. Wasn't spending it on much." "Just gold?" Sarah turned to face him, her voice rising. "It's a fortune, and you don't even know us." "I know enough." Elias leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. "I know your father's sick, I know you've been working yourself to the bone trying to keep him alive. I know Reeves was planning to do something that would have destroyed you both." His voice went hard. "And I know what it's like to be treated as property." Something in his tone made Sarah pause. "What do you mean?" Elias was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "Before I joined the Army, I was bound labor, indentured. My father sold my contract to a logging company when I was 12 to pay off his drinking debts. Spent 6 years hauling timber for men who worked us like animals. Beatings if you slowed down. Worse if you tried to run. When I finally earned my freedom at 18, I swore I'd never let anyone own me again. And I'd never stand by while someone tried to own another person." The bitterness in his words hung in the air. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a knot of emotion she couldn't quite name. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be. It made me who I am." He pushed off from the wall. "Look, I don't expect anything from you. The debt's paid. You and your father are free. But Reeves meant what he said. He'll make life hard for anyone who trades with you. You're going to need help getting through the winter." "We can't accept any more from you," Sarah said, though the words tasted like ash in her mouth. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford, but taking charity from this stranger felt wrong somehow. "I'm not offering charity." Elias walked to the door, then paused. "I live about 10 miles north, up in the foothills. My cabin's bigger than this 2 rooms. Good roof, plenty of firewood. There's game in the mountains and a stream that doesn't freeze. Your father would be warmer there, and you wouldn't have to worry about Reeves causing trouble." Sarah stared at him. "You're asking us to come live with you?" "I'm offering shelter for the winter, nothing more." He met her eyes steadily. "You'd have your own room, your own space. I'm gone most days checking trap lines. It would just be practical." "Why?" Sarah asked again, the question that had been burning in her mind since he'd thrown down that gold. "Why do you care what happens to us?" Elias was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "Because I remember what it feels like to be desperate, to be powerless, and because—" He hesitated, then continued in a softer voice. "Because I saw the way you looked at your father, the way you were willing to sacrifice yourself for him. That kind of love is rare. It's worth protecting." Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. "I don't even know you." "No," Elias agreed, "but you got the winter to change that, if you want." He left then, stepping out into the cold afternoon and closing the door quietly behind him. Sarah stood frozen, her mind spinning with possibilities and fears. From his cot, her father spoke, his voice weak but clear. "He's a good man, Sarah, I can tell." "You can't know that. He could be." "He could be what? Worse than watching you sold to Clayton Reeves? Worse than dying in this freezing shack?" Jacob coughed, a rattling sound that shook his whole frame. "Sarah, my girl, I'm not going to last the winter. We both know it. But maybe you can, if you go with him." "Papa, don't talk like that." "Listen to me." Jacob's hand found hers, his grip surprisingly strong. "You spent your whole life taking care of me. Let someone take care of you for once. That man didn't pay a fortune just to see us freeze to death. He's offering a chance. Take it." Sarah wanted to argue, but the words died in her throat. She looked around the cabin, at the gaps in the walls where the wind whistled through, at the empty medicine bottles, at the meager supplies that wouldn't last another month. Her father was right. Pride wouldn't keep them alive. The next morning, Sarah found Elias waiting outside with a pack mule loaded with supplies. He had brought blankets, dried meat, flour, and fresh medicine from the town doctor. He helped Jacob onto the mule's back and secured him with blankets, then turned to Sarah. "Ready?" She looked back at the cabin one last time, at the only home she'd ever known. Then she squared her shoulders and nodded. Yes. The journey took most of the day. They followed a narrow trail that wound up into the foothills, climbing gradually through stands of pine and aspen. The air grew colder and cleaner, carrying the scent of snow from the high peaks. Elias walked ahead, leading the mule with easy confidence, occasionally pointing out landmarks or animal tracks. He didn't try to make conversation, and Sarah was grateful for the silence. Her mind needed time to adjust to this sudden upheaval of everything she had known. As the sun began to set, they emerged into a small clearing. Elias's cabin stood in the center, built from thick pine logs chinked with moss and clay. It was larger than Sarah's family cabin, with a solid roof, real glass in the windows, and a stone chimney from which smoke curled lazily. Behind it stood a small barn and corral. A stream gurgled nearby, its water clear and cold. "Home," Elias said simply. He helped Jacob down and led them inside. The main room was warm and surprisingly neat, with a large fireplace, a sturdy table, and several chairs. Shelves lined the walls, filled with traps, tools, and supplies. Through a doorway, Sarah could see a smaller room with a bed covered in thick furs. "That's yours," Elias said, nodding toward the bedroom. "I'll sleep out here. There's wood stacked outside, food in the cellar. Make yourselves comfortable." Over the following days, they settled into an unexpected routine. Elias was gone most mornings before dawn, checking his trap lines and hunting. He would return in the late afternoon with game rabbits, deer, sometimes a wild turkey. Sarah cooked, cleaned, and cared for her father, who seemed to improve almost immediately in the warmer, drier cabin. The medicine Elias had purchased helped too, easing Jacob's coughing and giving him enough strength to sit up and eat proper meals. Elias was a man of few words, but Sarah noticed things about him. The way he always made sure the woodpile was stocked, how he brought fresh meat even on days when he looked exhausted. The quiet care he took in crafting a better walking stick for Jacob. He asked for nothing in return, never made demands or suggestions about how Sarah should spend her time. He simply provided, steady and reliable as the mountains themselves. One evening in early December, as snow fell softly outside, Sarah brought Elias his dinner, where he sat mending a trap near the fire. She had made venison stew with herbs she'd found in his surprisingly well-stocked kitchen and fresh bread from the Dutch oven. "Thank you," Elias said, accepting the bowl. He tasted it, and something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. "This is good, really good." "My mother's recipe," Sarah said, sitting across from him. "She died when I was 15, but I remember her cooking." They ate in companionable silence for a while. Then Sarah said, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why did you really help us? And don't say it's because you could. There's more to it than that." Elias set down his bowl and stared into the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows across his weathered face, making him look both younger and older at the same time. "I told you about being bound labor," he said finally. "What I didn't tell you was what happened when I got free. I went back to find my father, to tell him I'd survived, that I'd made something of myself despite what he'd done. You know what I found? He'd died 2 years earlier, drunk, alone, in a gutter in St. Louis. Nobody even knew his name. Nobody cared. Sarah's heart ached at the pain in his voice. I realized then that I'd wasted years being angry at a pathetic old man who'd sold me because he was weak and desperate, and I thought about all the times someone could have helped him, helped us, but didn't, because we weren't worth the trouble, because we were poor and powerless. He looked at Sarah. When I saw you in that street, I saw myself, saw my father. I saw what happens when good people stand by and let bad things happen because it's easier than taking a stand. You saved us, Sarah said softly. I did what anyone should have done. He picked up his bowl again. Besides, I was getting tired of being alone up here. It's nice to have someone to cook for me. The comment was clearly meant to lighten the mood, but Sarah heard the truth beneath it. Elias Boone, the legendary mountain man, was lonely. Winter deepened, and the cabin became its own small world. Snow piled high outside, and the temperature dropped until water froze solid in minutes. But inside, they were warm. Jacob continued to improve, gaining weight and strength. He spent his days carving small wooden figures, animals, and birds that Elias promised to trade in town come spring. Sarah found herself watching Elias more and more. She noticed the way his hands moved with practiced efficiency when he skinned a rabbit or mended equipment, the rare smile that transformed his face when Jacob told a good story, the patience he showed teaching her to shoot, standing behind her to adjust her aim, his voice steady and encouraging. She was falling for him, she realized one night as she lay in her bed listening to the wind howl outside. This quiet, damaged man who had saved her without asking for anything in return. It terrified her. Sarah had never been courted, never been looked at with desire. She knew what she was, plain, heavy, unmarriageable by conventional standards. The idea that someone like Elias might see her as anything but an obligation seemed impossible. But sometimes she caught him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. And sometimes, when their hands brushed passing plates or tools, the contact lingered a moment longer than necessary. One evening, in late January, Elias returned from checking traps to find Sarah outside, struggling to carry an armload of firewood. She had slipped on ice, and the logs had scattered across the snow. "Let me help," Elias said, moving to gather the wood. "I can do it," Sarah snapped, frustration and embarrassment making her voice sharp. "I'm not helpless." "I never said you were." Everyone thinks it. The fat girl who can't even carry firewood, who had to be rescued because she couldn't save herself. Elias stopped and looked at her, really looked at her. "Is that what you think? That I see you as helpless? Don't you?" Sarah's eyes burned with unshed tears. "I'm nothing special, Elias. I'm not pretty or delicate or any of the things men want. I'm just me, heavy and plain and ordinary." Elias set down the wood and stepped closer. "You want to know what I see when I look at you?" Sarah wanted to run, to hide from whatever pity was about to come, but something in his voice held her in place. "I see someone who spent years breaking herself to keep her father alive, who faced down Clayton Reeves without begging or crying, who learned to shoot in 3 days when most men take weeks, who makes this cabin feel like more than just walls and a roof." His voice dropped. "I see someone beautiful, strong, worth saving." "You don't mean that." "I never say things I don't mean." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers were rough from hard work, but gentle beyond measure. I know what people see when they look at me, a scarred-up mountain man, half wild, more comfortable with animals than people. But you never looked at me like that. You see me, Sarah, the real me, and I see you too. The kiss was tentative at first, questioning, but when Sarah didn't pull away, it deepened into something real and hungry and full of months of unspoken longing. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, clouds of vapor mixing in the cold air. "I'm not good with words," Elias said roughly, "but I want you to stay, not as charity or obligation. Stay because you want to, because this us feels right." Sarah wanted to say yes immediately, but years of caution held her back. "What happens when spring comes? When we can go back to town?" "Then we go back, together, or we stay here, or we head further west. I don't care where we are, Sarah, as long as you're there." "You barely know me." "I know enough, and I'll spend the rest of my life learning the rest, if you'll let me." This time, Sarah was the one who kissed him, pouring all her hope and fear and desperate longing into it. The firewood lay forgotten in the snow. They were married in March by a traveling preacher who passed through the mountains. Jacob gave his blessing with tears of joy, strong enough now to stand and witness the ceremony. The spring came slowly, melting the snow and revealing the green life beneath. When they finally made the trip back to Broken Creek, it was together, Sarah and Elias, riding side by side, Jacob on a sturdy horse Elias had traded for. Word of their marriage had preceded them, carried by trappers and traders. The townspeople's reception was mixed. Some were genuinely happy. Others whispered and gossiped. But Sarah found she didn't care anymore. She had found something more valuable than their approval. Clayton Reeves had left Broken Creek in January, they learned. Some said he'd gone to California, others that he'd headed back east. His ranch had been sold to pay his own debts, the empire he'd built crumbling without his iron grip to hold it together. Sarah felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only relief that his shadow no longer darkened her life. Elias and Sarah used some of his remaining gold to buy a proper homestead in the foothills, good land with water and timber. They built a larger cabin with their own hands, working side by side through the long summer days. Jacob lived in a comfortable addition, his health continuing to improve. The homestead thrived. Elias's hunting and trapping skills combined with Sarah's farming knowledge created a self-sufficient life. But they didn't keep everything for themselves. Each spring, they made trips to Broken Creek loaded with medicine, food, and supplies for families struggling to survive. They asked for nothing in return, only that those they helped would someday help someone else. Sarah bore 3 children over the years, 2 boys and a girl, all healthy and strong. She never lost the weight that society deemed unacceptable, and she no longer cared. Elias loved every inch of her, showed it every day in 1,000 small ways, and she loved him with equal fierceness, this man who had seen her worth when no one else would. On warm summer evenings, they would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the mountains. Sometimes Jacob would join them, his face peaceful as he carved wooden toys for his grandchildren. And Sarah would think about that terrible day in November when her life had seemed destined for darkness, and the mountain man who had stepped out of the shadows to offer light. "What are you thinking about?" Elias would ask, his arm around her shoulders. About choices, Sarah would say, about how one person choosing courage can change everything. It wasn't courage, it was just what was right. Same thing, Sarah would reply, and kiss him as the stars began to emerge overhead. They grew old together on that mountain, their love deepening with each passing season. And when travelers passed through, heading west toward unknown futures, they would stop at the Boone homestead and find welcome. Food and shelter freely given, stories shared around the fire, and always the quiet example of two people who had found each other in the darkest moment and built a life of light. The legend of the mountain man and the woman he saved spread across the territory, but those who knew them best understood the truth. They had saved each other, and in doing so had proved that worth is not measured by wealth or appearance, but by the courage to stand up when standing is hard, and the grace to offer kindness when kindness is rare. Their love became part of the mountains themselves, enduring and true, a testament to the transformative power of seeing people not for what they appear to be, but for who they truly are.